That way, if people were not able to attend, it gives them that opportunity to be able to listen to these topics and our discussions. And there's also the option to get a CE if you view it virtually as well. All right, pull up. So first, I just want to, again, welcome everyone. I'm Billy Tyler. I am the membership chair for the Marriage and Family Therapists, the Washington Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, and the chair of the Networking Task Force. And we want to welcome you to our Building a Better Us community conversations for systemic thinkers. These events are really just designed for us to get together, share, learn, and connect over conversations on challenging topics across our communities and our state. So we're hoping it provides opportunities for inspiration, support, continued education opportunities, and connections with your fellow Washington MFT community. And I also want to introduce our task force, Rochelle, who will be reviewing what to expect and event etiquette, and Astrid, who will lead today's panel discussion on sex and spirituality in session. So I'm going to turn it over to Rochelle.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Billy. Again, just welcome. We're glad to have you all here. I think, as Billy said, we're almost at a year, so I think most of us have learned to love and live in the Zoom world. So if you have any direct questions, there is a chat function. You can direct message me if you're having any trouble with your Zoom, but we do recommend that you put yourself on the presenter view or the speaker view. That way the person speaking does show up for you and you're not trying to jump around. You can save a copy of the chat at the end of the session, which is sometimes helpful with all the things that get added in there for resources, but we will upload those resources to WAMF.org in the short future when we're able to, just to share those with everybody. Due to the limited time frame of all of our events, we do ask that you submit your questions through the chat feature, and then kind of depending on how much time we have at the end, we may ask you to address the panelists yourselves, or we will ask the question on behalf of the group, especially if we have the same question coming in quite a bit. Again, those can be asked to the general group or to me directly, but please hold questions till the end, or post them throughout the chat, and then we'll address them at the end of the panel discussion. We will keep everyone on mute during the panel discussion, and our moderator, Astrid, will be leading that. And then at the end, again, we will address your questions. It is our intention for our community conversations to be an opportunity to connect, learn, and share in meaningful ways as system thinkers, and we want to thank you for joining us today. With that, we'd like to kick it over to Astrid to begin our sex and spirituality in session.
All right, well, welcome to today's community conversation, sex and spirituality in session. So through today's conversation, we hope to create a space that allows you, our attendees, to gain an understanding of barriers clients experience, awareness of common issues regarding this topic, as well as learn methods and obtain resources to help integrate sex and spirituality into your sessions. So this event will be a panel discussion in which today's panelists have been assembled to help all of us learn, share, and connect in meaningful ways as systemic thinkers within the topic of sex and spirituality. So I would like to thank Horatius Gittins, Jim Maxwell, Jocelyn Rebar, and Charity Laughlin for participating as our panelists today. So our format will begin with each of our panelists answering prepared questions, followed by an open question and answer session with questions submitted in the chat by you, our attendees. So before we get to the questions, we would like to welcome the panelists and ask each of them to briefly introduce themselves. And we will start with Jim.
Thank you, Astrid. So we were given some things on the front end, and I'll go ahead and address that. So I've been, as we talk about this particular topic, I've been in ministry of some sort for the last 40 years, and I've been in MFT for the last 25 years. So not only am I a clinician, I work at Blue Leaf Mental Wellness here in Vancouver. I'm also an Army Reserve chaplain, and specifically a family life chaplain, working within a military perspective during my reserve duty. And so some of the things that we wanted to talk about are why are sex and spirituality important in sessions, and how did I get comfortable digging into it? Well, it's my background between ministry and MFT. It's something that I've talked about regularly. I come from an idea that it's a health, that both of those subjects are very healthy, and that even the combination of the subjects of sex and spirituality are healthy. And so very willing to be able to address that in conversation, in therapy, or whatever the context might be. So what am I seeing with clients? I'm seeing rarely that clients bring both subjects together. There are some times that it does happen, but it's rare. I find oddly that people are less comfortable talking about sex than they are about spirituality. And spirituality is becoming a more frequent conversation. And coming from that systemic perspective, I bring it up as I think we are a biopsychosocial, spiritual type of being, and I use that format. So that's just part of the education and allows me to ask people about their spirituality so I understand where they're coming from. And so what I'm seeing are quite a few people who aren't really connected to their spirituality in any way. And those people seem to be ungrounded. And that has become especially apparent during COVID. And so they've had a hard time answering some of the questions or figuring out how they should be during this difficult and different kind of time. Why are these taboo? Well, I think, we don't talk about religion, we don't talk about politics, and of course, we never talk about sex because that's not what we do in polite society. I think we still have that holdover that comes from a culture and a time even older than myself. And so that's a little bit about what goes on with me and what I'm seeing. And I'll mute and let us go on to the next panel.
Thank you, Jim. I love that introduction. Next, we'll have Charity.
Well, hello, everyone. It's so great to see you all here. I am, in my licensure process, very close to obtaining my LMFT and also my certified sex therapist credential through AASECT. Those will both come through at about the same time. So my work right now is primarily focused around couples and adult individuals who are struggling with some aspect of the intersection of relationships and sexuality. Now, this is a topic that's very important and meaningful to me and very relevant to the work that I'm doing right now. Why is it important to me? I have come to believe and understand that both sexuality and spirituality are core to our identity as human beings. But I want to define those a little bit more broadly, that sexuality is not sexual intercourse or a physical act only. That's a small part of it. I think of it more broadly as eroticism, as a kind of creative force within a person and a reach towards aliveness and connection. And as far as spirituality, I like to distinguish between religion and spirituality, and both may be applicable to a person, but for some of our clients, one may be more applicable than the other. Religion is more, involves a shared set of traditions that you practice with a community, and spirituality, I see, has more to do with these questions around meaning and joy and purpose and what deeply grounds you, and times both of joy and pain. So what I'm seeing in my clinical practice is that truly both of these topics are very woven into every aspect of life, but they don't always need to be addressed like as a distinct topic. They can be brought up very organically as part of clinical work that's already going on. And that often what is happening in the sexual aspect of a person's sexuality is isomorphic to other things that are happening in their relationship. So sometimes there's a fine balance with this, but sometimes in relationships that are distressed, if they're not too distressed, a lot of really good relational work can be done by addressing the sexual and the physical connection, particularly when it's grounded in that sense of grounding into aliveness and meaning. This is not always the case. I find that with both spirituality and sexuality, it's always this and this. And that's one of the things, I think one of the reasons why there can be so much trauma around both of these topics, because it can be more than one thing at one time. And so it can be both very wonderful and also very confusing and very unwonderful at the same time. And so part of the work can be combing out those different things. Why is it taboo in our to bring this up in therapy and in our lives in general? I think that Jim said it very well, but I think this has a lot to do with cultural scripts and even gender scripts. If you're a female identified person, you know, you often have a script of not being too sexual, and there's, I think, similar ones, but in a different kind of way for if you're male identified, and that's not even talking about genders that don't fit into the binary. And it's also both of these are very value-laden topics. And so I think a great deal of Self of the Therapist work has to be done in order to define where you stand on these, and be clear about that, but not impose those values within session. And so with that, I will mute and go on to the next.
That's good, Charity, and I'm definitely gonna ask a question more about trauma for sure. All right, Horatius, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. So a good morning again. It's just by way of introduction. I participate as faculty in one of the universities in the area here in Spokane, where we, one of our program, the program that I'm a part of within the School of Education here, is to train therapists in the field of marriage and family therapy. That's our specific modality. That's what we do, train therapists. So I'm faculty at the institution. So I get involved at one end with the training of therapists to enable them and, you know, attempt to cultivate within young clinicians capacity to be attentive and to be very pragmatic in dealing with issues, both spirituality and sexuality. So that's part of what I do. In addition to that, I engage in seeing clients. And part of the area, for one reason or another, I'm not particularly certain, I get to see many couples, and many of those couples are from some type of religious background. So that's part of what I engage in. My history, somewhat similar to Jim, is that I served as clergy for multiple years. I served as clergy while I was in graduate school, while I was in doctoral school, training in the field. So I got to watch the interface of individuals dealing with issues of sexuality and issues of spirituality, and sometimes not recognizing what they're dealing with. Because of that overlay, both of you used, or each of our presenters thus far used the word taboo. People feel uncomfortable discussing certain subjects. So I understand that particular challenge that we're constantly going to be engaged in. And as you deal with clients, that's something that you can pretty much assume that they're going to be probably uncomfortable talking about issues of sexuality, and they're probably going to be uncomfortable in certain instances dealing with issues of spirituality, particularly if you meet them in a context where they were not explicitly coming to you from a religion, explicitly indicating that they're coming from a religion religious background, or if they might well be very religious or very spiritual, but they're not engaged in any practicing aspects of religiosity. It's private, they're hoarding it, they have it, but they're not certain that they want to talk about that spirituality with the clinician, especially if they do not know your background, as meaning that you're sensitive to issues of spirituality. So the issue, therefore, that I want to emphasize, and I like Bill's terminology, both our presenters made reference to the biopsychosocial spiritual dimension of the work of how we interpret humanity. Our systems thinkers, we're constantly concerned about the totality of the system that a client is embedded in. So I like that. So I want to raise that also as an observation of something that we can constantly be attentive to. The thing that I want to just upfront indicate is that just like spirituality, and I think many of us are recognizing, since the APA in the late 70s and early 80s started to embrace the principles of spirituality and integrating the reality of spirituality into therapy. We as clinicians, we understand explicitly that we have the prerogative to engage our clients in a way that free them up, make them feel comfortable addressing issues of spirituality, because we're able to observe to them the realities of what spirituality means to them, the religiosity and so on. So we embrace that. So now they feel comfortable. They feel that they have permission to do that. Many individuals listening to me now probably are comfortable with that. What we are not yet comfortable with is also embracing the issue of spirituality, how all pervasive that is to the human being. Sometimes the clinician is somewhat tentative speaking to the issue. So what I'm suggesting is similar to how we have already embraced spirituality. We also feel comfortable embracing the principles of sexuality, the reality of sexuality, how important that is. And we want to open up that space also within the therapy session. We want to open up the space to address that thing. And sometimes we can just, it doesn't have to be the person's willing already to speak about some sexuality issue. They might be uncomfortable raising it, but the clinician is looking for an opportunity to make them comfortable, give them permission to address that, as we do, by the way, with many other things in therapy. If the clinician brings that inhibition to address the topic in question, whatever that topic is, the client might also do a similar thing. So what I'm trying to say here is open up the space. The psychoeducation work of spirituality and religiosity sometimes help us to show the relationship between the two. And I want to say finally, just in this introductory part, to observe that there are multiple aspects of sexuality which are integrated in spirituality as individuals experience them in their religious settings that they experience it. And what is also important to bear in mind is that within certain religious experiences, some traditions, there can also be existing what we refer to as, LaVeyan and others refer to this as that sex negative attitudes towards from spirituality, which emerges from spirituality. So we want to be aware of some of this sex negative attitudes, which may be retained within the religious culture that some of your clients come to you from, or some of them operating. It may not necessarily be still existing there, but at least they think so, because somehow they heard in the religious teaching that sex negative attitudes, the unwillingness to talk about sexual things, is because there is that taboo overlaying, and not just a taboo, but something negative about sex when experienced even within the context of a committed relationship, a marital relationship. So I'm saying, That's also something we want to be attentive to, the negative dispositions which are maintained with sex. And within our clinical work, we might need to also explore that and be prepared to explore that very deliberately. The issues of guilt and shame related to sex, we can also talk about, but these are some of the things I encounter. The issues of trauma and the issues of certain sexual inhibitions and conditions which might require additional specialist attention can also be a part of what we might have to deal with as we do the work. That's what I want to say, but thank you all very much for being attentive to what I was saying. Thanks.
Yeah, well, thank you for dropping all that. That's awesome. I love the word embrace. And then Jocelyn, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, well, gosh, I have to go after Horacious. It was so beautifully said. But I think I just want to piggyback off of what these three other panelists have shared. So I'm Jocelyn. I live in Spokane. I have a private practice here. I'm an LMFT, and my specialty is, working with couples and specifically around sex and sexuality. I see a lot of clients working through gender issues as well. And so one of the topics I'll be talking about later will be non-heterosexual clients, and that, broadening into not just orientation, but gender identity and expression as well. And the issues of religion and sexuality, I see a lot in my clients, a lot of questioning. So a lot of questioning of beliefs currently, maybe growing up in a certain cultural background, religious background, and over time going, okay, is that really what I connect with right now? I'm trying to, find my own grounding, my own footing in what I believe. What are the things that really still ring true to me? What are some things that I don't really necessarily connect with anymore? And same with issues of sexuality as well, right? I'm questioning my interests or things that I find exciting or even repulsive, that kind of a thing. I work a lot with younger women who have issues of interest, let's say. So they'll be in a relationship and they say, I'm not as interested. As we come to go through our sessions, there's a lot of body image issues as well. And I think, we can connect all of these pieces, right? We've already kind of touched on that, how everything is so connected, where, if you grow up in a certain kind of cultural background, religious background, maybe how you view your own body, how you view kind of the role of yourself if you're identifying as a man, identifying as a woman, what that means for you being a partner. I am seeing also a lot of clients, when I go back to kind of the questioning idea of things, I see a lot of people questioning these, traditionally taught ideas of relationship, specifically around monogamy. And so I have a lot of clients who are either actively practicing or interested in discussing or opening up their relationship to, potentially ethically non-monogamous practices. And so I have quite a few clients who either identify as polyamorous or are interested in, okay, well, I want to be in this committed relationship, but my sexual interests also expand elsewhere. And so that often creating a big I don't know, maybe concern or just kind of disconnect in potential, like, well, my beliefs and what I've grown up in, this is what I'm supposed to be. This is who I'm supposed to show the world I am, but I'm interested in maybe having sex with someone of the same body parts as I have, or, same gender expression. So also I would like to say that my mind tends to go all over the place when when I'm starting to talk about sex and even sex and religion. And so if I just go all over the place, I'm just going to kind of hone it in and say, that's who I am. Those are kind of the clients that I see. To again, expand off of what these other three panelists have shared, I think it is our job and our responsibility as clinicians to open up these conversations for our clients, and early on, right? So I know a lot of clinicians are feel uncomfortable, right? I think what Jim was sharing early on, we don't talk politics, we don't talk religion, we don't talk sex. And in a very intimate setting with our clients, those conversations have to be on the table. And so I think the earlier you can approach those conversations with people, or at least say, hey, if you have questions about this, or if that's something you want to talk about at some point, I'm here to talk about that with you. It's our responsibility to open that door for them so that they recognize, okay, yeah, this can be a safe space, so I can explore that and understand myself even better. So I'll just leave it at that as well, so we can get into the other.
That's good. That's good, Jocelyn. Thank you. And then when it comes to body image, like definitely very important for sure. Well, thank you, panelists, for that introduction. So we'll go ahead and kick it off with these lovely questions that I have prepared for y'all. So we're gonna start with Charity, and then we'll kick it over to, and then we'll have Jim follow after Charity gives her answer. So Charity, what are the consequences or missed opportunities when we don't explore sex and spirituality with clients?
Such a good question. One of the first things that comes to mind, and particularly with not exploring sexuality, is that it can reinforce the shame and the silence that has already been there around, particularly around sexuality. And then where I would bring in the spirituality aspect of that is so often, as our other panelists have already mentioned, our sexuality can be informed by beliefs that maybe don't work for us anymore, but we don't know what to do about them, that came from religious and cultural scripts. And I always want to support clients in not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, in that, but to really connect with what is working for them now and what's meaningful for them right now, and what they can feel really good about and congruent about in themselves. I guess another thing that I would say with sexuality, the research tells us that when sex is going well in a relationship, it comprises about 10 to 20% of a relationship. And when it's not going well, it comprises 75 to 90% of the relationship. And so when it's not going well, it's a really big deal for the relationship. And so I think that's another reason why it's important to be willing to have the hard conversations. And by us as therapists modeling, having these conversations that aren't always super comfortable, we're creating space for our clients to do that as well. I think that's probably all I would say about that. I wonder if there's any other panelists that wanted to chime in on that.
Yeah, Jim, I wanted to get your thoughts on that as well. And I could read the question again. What are the consequences or missed opportunities when we don't explore sex and spirituality with clients? What are your thoughts, Jim?
Okay. Well, I think there's just so much that is missed. I hadn't heard those statistics, so I greatly appreciate that research perspective. And I think when we don't address it, we end up missing part of what's important in helping that particular client. And so, for instance, the sexuality is very much a part of who we are, for good or ill, depending on how we've received those thoughts, whether it's some of the negative things that have come out of society and media. I can't imagine the pressure that I think that most people who are female identified feel based on the things that go on. And it just seems problematic to me. Guys have similar kinds of things, though. We have to perform in a certain way. We have to be able to do certain things, or all of these things. And if not, then we are less than a man. And if we're identified that way, then that becomes problematic for who we are. And so we may be depressed and all of these other kinds of things. But what we're really talking about is how pressured we are at work, or maybe we talk about how nagging our wife, our partner is, or something of that sort, and we move all around the topic, but we don't actually speak to the topic. And so for the therapist to bring that out, for that to be part of the assessment or part of the opening of the space, lets us get to the issue in a way that really hits to what's happening, as opposed to just some of the symptoms of it. That's kind of my thought on that.
Yeah, definitely getting down to the root, right? That's one thing for us clinicians when it comes to a lot of things, getting to that initial root situation that's causing the ripple effect of all this other symptoms. Jocelyn, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think something, I mean, I agree with what the both of you have shared too. And when I took my very first human sexuality class, I think it was day one, my instructor had said, after this class and over the next week, I want you to look around you and just be observant in where sexuality is just in your everyday life. So in music, in movies, in interactions you have with other people, and just looking at someone on the street. So it is everywhere. So if we're not acknowledging that you're just looking at things, you're experiencing things, you're smelling something, you're having sensations in your physical body, what a massive missed opportunity, right? To acknowledge, okay, how are you connecting with your own body? Where are your thoughts going on a daily basis? Very important to, I'll just kind of leave it at that. It's everywhere. So if something is everywhere and you're not talking about it, then, I mean, that kind of speaks for itself.
Exactly, exactly. Horatius?
Yeah, just to continue along, I agree with everything that has been said thus far. To continue along that vein is to meet the way you framed the question. One consequence can be that you're missing an opportunity to address upfront some things that, to give the client permission to address really upfront some of the realities of the person's life. You know, sexuality, the World Health Organization would say, is a core dimension of a person's life. It incorporates such things as notions of beliefs, facts, fantasies, rituals, attitudes, values, etc., rights to certain gender identity and roles, sexual behaviors, all those things. Those are rights that individuals have. And I think what I want to agree with the panelists on is that to not address that deliberately, and I like Jim saying right up front in the at intake session, to have a discussion with if it's a couple that has come in to inquire about sexual behavior, you know, to inquire about having sex. If it's not a couple, the same principle would obtain to investigate, because you need to know exactly what's going on within the life of the person. And if it's a single person, there are also issues that may be impacting. At one place I worked in a university setting during some course of the work that I did, and an individual came in, a young person came in, and he or she was so traumatized over the fact that had suddenly contracted an STD and was so traumatized. And then in the course of the discussion about, you know, sexual engagement, the person was certain it was a certain person from whom this was received, only to discover that the person had been engaged with so many individuals that guess may not have been an appropriate, may not have been an accurate guess. What is my point? My only point here is that is a part of the therapeutic work that we may have to be involved with. So to have the facts and to have the client become aware of realities around him or her, that's important. I often have clients who have been together for long times, and then sometimes when they talk about the period of time they have not been having sex, they've been in severe distress. And that particular issue, when it is raised, it amazes me that there has not been a suspicion that this might be a part of our problem. So that's what I'm saying. I think I am agreeing that you can miss quite a bit of what goals you need to set with your clients from early if you do not look to address the human sexuality, sexual behavior, sexual interactions, and issues of sexuality and spirituality. Many individuals are in distress in the relationship. Why? Because they got married, they had sex before marriage, and some way they're running around with a thought where they heard that this relationship is now cursed because we had sex before we got married. Those are real things that people deal with. So that's my story.
Yeah, that's good. And that really ties into what Jocelyn was saying about what is being seen and what if, the image and everything like that. And actually my next question, I'm going to start with you, Horatius. So how do we keep the balance with clients in exploring sex and spirituality when therapy is somehow violating or even like betraying their internal values and beliefs, such as their religion, their culture, their family values?
Thanks. To me, that's one of the challenges that I think we can build on. And to me, what might be important there would be in that engagement. Part of my challenge as I deal with clients with issues of spirituality and religiosity, especially if they have a Christian background that they come in with, and very often that's where we see some of these challenges, is that I'm somewhat familiar with the biblical text. I'm somewhat familiar with the literature coming out of religious circles. And so it's the psychoeducation that I work with at that point, and I encourage others to work with, to help to clarify to individuals sometimes where the internal values and beliefs may themselves need to be reflected upon. And so now we get to work with clients to see, well, what are the authorities in your life? And Jim would certainly, I'm hoping, would be able to help me there, because one of the things you get clients to reflect on when we ask them what are the authorities in life, we start to clarify, where did you get this particular value from? It might just be a cultural value that they've been running along with, and they have believed that, and some individuals think this is of God, these particular values. They've not yet taken an opportunity to explore to see whether this is not something just coming from society. So some of the sex net or from some religious teaching that may not be consistent with the values and the principles explicit in the biblical text. So that's sometimes when you get to do that work. I'm very cautious here as I go at this, because it might, what I'm saying might suggest that we try to become familiar with some of the guidance individuals are receiving from that have given them these values, these internal values and beliefs. And that might not be as much work as we think it. We ask them where they get it from, and then we can explore with them these sources to verify, as in that dialogue, to verify whether or not these things are so. So many individuals do not know that it is within the fathers of Christianity, what we call the Christian church, so to speak, St. Augustine, Origen. These are individuals. St. Augustine advocated that sex was not something individuals should engage in because it contributes to the development of the vices. It is rooted in motivation that is inappropriate. For example, something that was given by God to humanity for joy and happiness, that's how it's distorted and interpreted. Others have interpreted, sex is simply for, in certain religious circles, I can name the church fathers, I don't want to get into that right now, but sex is really for procreation and not for enjoyment. So what is my point? Many individuals have imbibed these over time, and they're not certain where these came from. And so the therapist now has a real difficult job, because the therapist, together with the clients, as they're working together, going uphill, trying to deal with some of these beliefs, to correct them, to show them, to get them to understand and appreciate the beauty of sexual intimacy. So that's part of what it is. So I'm thinking that the challenge here is to work with the client to see how we can collaborate with the client in a way to help clarify and the understanding of human sexuality and spirituality in a way that for them to understand that these things are compatible. Where do we get the help from? The very biblical texts that they're claiming to get some of these negative things from. We can also find the positive things, and other healthy religious literature can be helpful in doing that. It is a task, but that's one of the ways we can start working with that. And of course, we are able to put that together with good social science literature also. I'm just assuming that as therapists, we're already familiar with that part and you figure that part out. But I wanted to communicate on this and look to bring together the two to show where good scientific research is also consistent with good theological thought.
Right. And not just that either or, for sure.
Right. They can be integrated, yes.
Exactly. And Charity, I wanted to get your thoughts on this too, because I remember you mentioning in regards to not either or, but bringing together. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on this question as well.
Yeah, and I really love how Horatius was talking about that stance of collaboration with clients in this process. I think that's so important, and that's what I kind of where I'll start with that. But when there's a values conflict within a person, a lot of times I'll start with some psychoeducation around what I like to call sexual health principles. So this is not healthy sexuality versus unhealthy sexuality. So I'm not labeling something as good or bad, but sexual health. And one of the models that I like to look at is Doug Braun-Harvey's from his out of control sexual behavior treatment model. And so he works from a very strength-based approach. And so the principles he offers are consent, non-exploitation, honesty, shared values in a partnered experience, and pleasure and safety. And so I just sit with those ideas with a client and help and just create space for them to wrestle through what those mean for them and what feels congruent with them without imposing that I'm giving you a roadmap to how it has to be for your life. And I do think there is a place, though, in therapy sometimes, and drawing on an idea from narrative therapy, sometimes you do need to be a bit of that social conscience, because sexuality can. One of the aspects of it that is that both and is that it can be both very pleasurable and it can also violate other people. And so we have to bring that awareness into the room as well. And another way I talk with clients about this and weaving spirituality back into the conversation is to connect with their idea of the divine or their God image, and ask them to play with or imagine the idea of God being there, that image that they hold as sacred and safe. And it may not be safe for them. And that's a whole interesting avenue of research, but sometimes there can be a very powerful sense of affirmation of their sexuality by them being able to connect with this sense of a divine that is looking upon this part of their life with a sense of blessing.
That's good. So good. Before I jump to the next question, Jocelyn or Jim, anything that you want to add on while we're still on this topic?
Yeah, I Charity, I'm glad you brought up the out of control behaviors piece of things too, because when Horatius was talking, I was thinking about a lot of my clients who come in with kind of self-identified, let's say, addiction, right? And first of all, we could go off for a long time about this topic. I don't like to use the word addiction in my office when it comes to sexual behaviors. We kind of look at more of the out of control sexual behaviors. But I think, for example, I'll have clients come in with this self-identified pornography addiction, let's say. And so it would be really easy for someone to go, okay, you have an issue. Here's a 12-step program. Let's do this like an AA kind of thing. when really we have to look at what's actually going on, right? Are you watching pornography too much? Are you masturbating too much? Are you having concerns with your moral and ethical values when this is happening? Is this a relationship concern? So really having to dive further and further into all those layers of what someone is presenting for you, right? So we find that a lot. I would guarantee that, people will either self-identify with something very often or try to label like their partner with something as well, narcissistic, or they have borderline, whatever it is, right? So we have to try and be really gentle and careful with when someone comes in and presents these things with us and go, okay, let's ask more questions. Let's dive deeper into what this is actually touching on for you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good. So good. And Jim, I definitely want to get your thoughts on this too, but it also relates to this next question, which I'm going to start with you anyways. So,
Okay.
So I'll ask the question and then get your answer from that. And then of course, definitely tie in with what has been said for this one. So, so the question, it's more of a discussion rather than a question. So it's like discussion, the idea of religious trauma and like the impact it can have on personal health and sex and spirituality. So I'll give like an example. So let's say we have a client who's a religious woman and she feels stuck in between her spirituality and the narrative she was taught growing up about how sex wasn't something girls did, and now being married and having this expectation of knowing what to do intimately, sexually, and feeling terrified about maybe not being able to fully meet that expectation for her partner. So what would be like some avenues for opening up the door to explore how these narratives have caused a potential harm to this client or to clients that may have a similar experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And fortunately, Horatius actually gave most of my answer already in this. So yes, I think we are in very much agreement in a lot of the ways that we approach this, Horatius. And I would say that it's true not only of Christianity, but of most of the major religions, that there is a sex positive. There is an understanding of the gift of sexuality, and that there's an understanding of the necessity of that religious, spiritual kind of idea. Coming back to our last and bringing those two together, what I heard from the panelists was this idea of values clarification and things of this site and the ideas, and that what we had there was cognitive dissonance. And we all know that cognitive dissonance is difficult for people, and that ambiguity is a hard place. Being in an ambiguous situation is difficult for people. And so when they come in with this cognitive dissonance or this ambiguity, the other thing that I'm seeing is that many, at least of my clients, and I would say not just clients, but as I work within the military, so at that point, they're not clients, they're soldiers who are coming by to see the one person who has complete confidentiality. We'll have that discussion at a different time, but it is absolutely complete, which at times becomes difficult. But it also helps build relationship. And so they can come to us because that word, what they speak to us, goes nowhere else. It cannot be compelled from us, not even by a court of law. And so there's a great safety there for people to be able to come and have those discussions. What I've found across all of these is that people are no longer quite so self-reflective. These things have been accepted as they've, I almost want to say, absorbed them as they go through life. And there seems to be little critical thought, critical in the definitional sense, right, of thinking about it deeply and making meaning and understanding of it. And so many people don't know how to make meaning of their lives. And that's what I find is difficult. So the spirituality speaks to personhood, to identity, to growth orientation, to personal agency, to coping strategies, to connection. I would refer you to the work of Dr. Lisa Miller out of Columbia University on spirituality, and some of that. And so to bring those together, so this woman, to the example that you brought, Astrid, that she's stuck in, is first to understand, I think as Horatius was getting at, is, okay, so how did you come about that? Where did this information come from? And what have you checked on for yourself? I find many times people say, and I'll use the Bible because it's what I'm most familiar with and what I most hear about. But for instance, they'll say, well, the Bible says this about sex. I say, oh, okay, please tell me where that is. And it's not meant to be mean or anything. It's meant to get an understanding. And they'll say, well, I'm not really sure. And the beauty of technology today is you can easily do a search of pretty much any text in the world, the Bible being included in that. And so we can search that. And I'm also somewhat familiar. And so we can clear that up. And then I spend quite a bit of time talking about how various sacred texts, by the way, I should remind everyone that the Kama Sutra is actually a sacred text. Okay, I know we see it at Barnes and Noble and it's got the pictures in it now, and we think of it as, this sex manual or whatever. It's actually a sacred text that deals with sexuality, and coming from that particular faith tradition. Okay, so, and I think that's positive. I think there are things that we can learn by that. I remind people that not only did the Bible speak about sex in the very beginning, and that God, as portrayed in the Bible, called it very good, but that the two people that are there were naked and unashamed. And I think that's a very powerful thing. And we speak about that, and it's not only literal but figurative as well. When we talk about the idea of, it's not just about your physical nakedness, but your emotional, your spiritual nakedness with that person, that there are no barriers between you. And so we talk about that. So we start talking about that with somebody who feels stuck and saying, let's look at some other ways of looking at that from the very system that you have value to. And so in that sense, that's where I can work with someone who maybe comes from a different spirituality than myself, because we refer back to that spirituality and we become congruent with it at that point. And we help people find that congruence. And when they're able to, and then if there isn't congruence, then now we have to deal with, well, what do we do when there's not congruence? If I come in with the thought that, well, yes, it's okay to murder, and I'm just using this as a hyperbolic example, then I look at the system that I say I believe in, and it says murder is not okay, I now have to deal with that congruence. And so that's where we can help clients as well in dealing with that. And we see that some of those things have become codified legally for us. Murder, obviously, but in the realms of sexuality and even spirituality and some of the conversations that we're having. So I think it's important to help people be self-reflective on their systems of belief and deal with the cognitive dissonance and deal with what the beliefs truly are, because sometimes they're misinformed.
I'm over here taking notes. Go ahead, Horatius.
Yeah, I just wanted to join in and to continue along Jim's thought there, because here we also from the question you framed for him, you also get to speak to the building of intimacy within the relationship that the person may be having. And the reason that was triggered in my mind was Jim's observation there about them being both naked and were not ashamed. We are living in a time now where the issues of society are so are driving us apart. Even individuals who are living together in a common domicile, or individuals who are married together and living in a common domicile. So this whole idea of the building of intimacy, and here we're talking about that capacity to communicate with each other in a manner that makes us know each other in a warm and connected manner, where we can share thoughts, feelings, deeper desires, etc. That's really that intimacy. And so to build on that, to be able to indicate to individuals dealing with that religious trauma type thing, to be able to build on that for them to understand the beauty of what was originally intended. Sexual intimacy was originally intended for beauty, for joy, for the individuals involved in the relationship. So you get to build on that to help, I think, alleviate the dissonance, the cognitive dissonance that Jim referenced there. So we get to do that in some way. And so the area there that you spoke about, the personal health, sometimes we also get to do some specific referrals if we're hearing folks talking things which may have a negative impact on what I might refer to here from a layman's perspective as their own physical health, which might be negatively impacting their sexual health. So we also get to have them engage other professionals in the field, their gynecologists, their, urologists, whatever they might need to get that additional help. And we get to frame that within the context of a healthy relationship. That's that biopsychosocial, physical, spiritual, the biological part we get involved there also, to help to build that. And we get to, destigmatize, to coin a terminology there, all aspects of the sexual relationship to the person, to help them to grow through the trauma that they may have been experiencing.
So good, so good. I'm gonna jump in here and say to our audience, we have been talking about a lot of stuff now, and I know there's some questions brewing in your guys' minds. So drop it in the chat, or if you want to directly send it to Rochelle, go ahead and do so, because there is going to be a Q&A after we finish up these questions. Charity, I'm going to open up the floor for you if you want to respond to the question that we just had up, and then Jocelyn, I have a new question to start you off with. Okay, go ahead, Charity.
Here I am. What's coming up for me is in terms of religious trauma or trauma from religion, as well as trauma from sexuality, is that it's taking each in turn with religion. Some of what I find clients bringing in is that it has been both a source of strength in their life and a source of comfort, and it's also been a source of hurt. And part of the therapy can be uncombing those two things and being able to hold both at the same time. Part of what I think can keep clients stuck is how confusing that is. That how can it be both at the same time, and what actually was it? And then, along with that, with childhood sexual abuse, one of the things that can be so challenging about that topic is that it is often, not always, but often a commingling of care and violation at the same time. So I think there's a similarity in the level of confusion that can cause. And part of the therapy is being able to understand that and building up this strong self-image and this strong identity that is bigger and is able actually to hold the light and the shadow at the same time.
Light and the shadow at the same time. Is that what you said, Charity? Okay, I want to make sure I wrote that down correctly for sure. And so Jocelyn, I'm gonna ask this next question for you, but of course, anything that you wanted to add from this last question, you can mingle it in there however you feel. So Jocelyn, let's discuss non-heterosexual narratives in culture and or faith. So can you give your thoughts and speak more on this topic of non-heterosexual narratives in culture and faith to bring more awareness of these ideas for our attendees today?
Mm-hmm. First of all, that's a very big topic and question. So, I mean, we will graze the surface of this today. I want to preface this by saying that I am a white, cis, heterosexual woman. And so I identify as an ally, right? But I am not part of the LGBTQIA population in how I express or in my orientation. So I'd just like to preface with saying that. I do think, so with what we were just talking about, it does kind of lean into this conversation as well. I was going to kind of touch on something that had jogged my mind when the other panelists were chatting. I think Horatius was talking about kind of the physical experience and physical health, sexual health, that kind of a thing. Something that I often see with clients is physical pain with sex as well. And what we have to do, right, is we have to go see all the doctors. We have to go to the gynecologist, go to the urologist, get our hormones tested, all of that kind of a thing. And if we look at the physicality and the physical health of our bodies, and if everything is looking okay, right, okay, we have to look at our emotional, physical, energetic, right, trauma that we've experienced. So I am kind of one of those like woo-woo-y type of people, if you will, where I'm more kind of energy and our body holds on to all kinds of things. I also am a yoga instructor, so if that gives you any kind of idea or background of me as well. So to bring it into kind of that physical piece of things, when we're looking at like ideas and messages that have been ingrained into us from a very young age, from our culture, from our religious background, as women, you know, we can lump all people who identify as women into a category of kinds of things that society is telling us. As men, like Jim was touching on this earlier, you know, expectations, ideas, that kind of a thing. And with being someone who is possibly not able or feeling like they're unable to express fully and as their authentic, truest self. Often someone who identifies as gay, someone who identifies as transgender. What I often see is a period of time where a person like this will kind of try to force themselves into what society wants them to be, right? So if someone is a homosexual and they're growing up in an environment that is not acceptable, that is not honored, then they will try to date people who society will say, or their family will say is okay to date, to try to be sexually attracted to that. And it is just not conducive or not congruent with who they are. And so I think something that's really important as clinicians, as you know, something I can share today is it's really important to define or have clients define for us their sexual orientation, their sexual identity, how they express their gender, and even define sex for us too, right? Because sex is just one small word that has a million different definitions to it. And so sex involves, who are you wanting to have sex with? Are you only wanting to have sex with yourself? Are you not interested in having sex with anybody else, including yourself? So there's so many different ranges of what sex even includes. I'm trying to think of where I want to take this. It's also very important, I think, as clinicians to make sure. So if you have a client coming in who identifies as transgender or genderqueer or homosexual, any sort of experience that might be out of the, I don't want to say the norm, that's not accurate, but that's not cisgendered heterosexual person, it's very important to acknowledge that that might not be the reason that they're coming into therapy, right? So if you try to highlight that as something and make it bigger than they're wanting it to be, then that can actually be traumatizing them even more. And so it's very important to ask questions of, is that something that you want to talk with me more about? Are you feeling, really comfortable in your expression, outside of this space? Are you feeling comfortable in, bringing your partner home to your family? Is that something, do we need to talk about that? Do we need to explore that more? If not, then it's not something that you need to push with these clients, right? If yes, ask the questions, be curious. This is where cultural humility comes in as well of, okay, if you are not experiencing the same kind of, if you're not the same race or cultural background or gender expression, then as best you can, being very curious, being very open to what these clients have to offer and what they have to share. Being open to letting your clients, learning from your clients as well, right? I, as a clinician, am not someone who sits in a chair and identifies as an expert by any means, right? I'm an expert in nothing, especially someone else's life, right? So being very curious, being very open. I was going to give an example of a client kind of touching on what I talked about a little bit ago. I have a client who was born with a vagina, lived in this very feminine expression for a very long time. They now use they, them pronouns and are expressing more non-binary. And if you're unfamiliar with the term non-binary, to put it very simply, I mean, the binary being, okay, male, female, we have two identities, right? And non-binary, there's this whole spectrum of everything in between. So non-binary is somewhere in the middle of that, right? Not choosing one or the other necessarily. And so this client of mine has expressed for 20 plus years of their life in this feminine body, has used their body in a very sexual way. She grew up Jewish, and which I was very unfamiliar with prior to this person being my client. And so I had to learn a lot from them. But they had kind of shared with me, they had an OnlyFans for a while because they could make money utilizing their body in a very sexual way, promoting their body toward cisgendered men, heterosexual men who were attracted to very feminine identifying bodies. And so we've gone through a long process of working through them really identifying in this true authentic way, identifying and expressing their body in a way that feels natural and intuitive, and recreating their own narrative of who am I as a sexual person? Because I've been existing in this body in this way that society has told me I have to, because I was born with a vagina and I had long hair at one point. So now I get to recreate and rewrite my own story, which is, okay, I'm, interested in having sex with people who have penises, and I've never had sex with someone else who has a vagina. I'm interested in that though. Does that feel weird? Is that okay? Is that wrong? Is that dirty? I hear those kinds of terms a lot in my office. This is dirty, this is wrong, this is shameful. And so we have to do a lot of unpacking of the guilt, the shame. Sex is natural. I mean, everything that all these other panelists have shared of this is a natural, intuitive thing, and it's built to be pleasurable and enjoyable. The other thing I wanted to share that doesn't necessarily hone in on non-heterosexual clients, but it absolutely can. I think the female body being something that shows up in my office often, like I had shared earlier, the messages about the female body. And this does not just come from, Christian background, Catholic backgrounds, Mormon backgrounds. This is a societal issue right now where female pleasure is not as highly valued as male pleasure. And so when is sex over? When a man finishes, and that's it, right? And so a lot of the work that I've done with people who have vulvas, who have vaginas, are your pleasure is important, your body matters, and how do you communicate that to your partner? So I just wanted to kind of express that that was a very important part of, kind of the narratives, the unpacking, the rewriting the story of I'm allowed to exist in this space and have a say and let myself be as important as my partner, whoever my partner might be. I think that something else that I was just thinking about, I think it was when Jim was talking, was I am not personally married myself, so I can't say anything about that yet, but it appears to me that vows are kind of changing and evolving as well. I think historically, really traditional Christian vows have said, I will like submit to you, and I can't speak to that necessarily, but I think they're kind of evolving in this way of this is a partnership more so than, one person in charge, the other person just submitting. And I think that has historically been a concern with a lot of my female clients too, of entering into a partnership, into a relationship where I don't matter, I'm just going to serve you. And, I'll be here for sexual pleasure and to make dinner and to do these kinds of things. And that's really evolving. And it's really important that we keep that going so that every person in the relationship, no matter how many people involved and what the dynamic is, it has a say and is important and heard and valued.
Absolutely. Whew, girl, that was a whole word.
I could keep going. I need to
That's
stop.
all right. That is okay. I love it. I'm gonna open it up to the rest of the panels for another minute here because we have a couple of questions in the chat. But then I also want to say, like, other than giving your thoughts of this last question that Jocelyn just lovely gave her answers to, what are also some tips and tricks that you guys can give to our audience, our people who are attended today, on how to help clients bring about talk of their own sex and spirituality in sessions, if there's anything that comes to the top of your head, including
since I'm unmuted, I'll just go very quickly and then let the rest of you go. I think first and foremost, it is very important to be connected to your own sexuality and your own experience. If you feel uncomfortable bringing up, the topic of religion, spirituality, sex, then your client is going to feel that and not feel that it's a safe space either. So making sure you are doing your own personal work to explore your own sexual identity, orientation, what makes you feel comfortable. And then I think, like I had said earlier, that the sooner you bring these topics up in session, or at least say, hey, this is something that we can talk about, the easier it is, right? Because if you're 6 months in and you go, oh yeah, by the way, are you sexually active? Then it just kind of feels out of nowhere and feels, so I think the sooner you can just lay these things out there and say, yeah, these are topics that we can touch on, and let your client know this is safe, this is approachable, then I think the easier that will be. Okay, go.
good. Open it up to the floor to other panelists, tips or tricks that you would like to give to our attendees on how to help clients out before we get to the questions.
Well, and I appreciate what Justin said right away, and I appreciated your ability to talk about penises and vaginas and vulvas, and these are fine words, right? I will say it is humorous when you're preaching. Horatius as a clergy member, myself as a clergy member, to be able to use those words from a pulpit. Is an important thing and somewhat humorous at times. I would remind people that there's an entire book in the Bible devoted to sexuality. It's called the Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, depending on your translation. But with that, one of the things I do right away in talking about the biopsychosocial spiritual is I have a little diagram that I use with folks. It's just a circle that represents a person. It's got some dotted lines in it so that I can pie chart and give, the physical, the mental, the social, and the spiritual. And for those who come from a faith background, I've got the appropriate faith references that I can apply for that as well. And I say, here it is. This is you as a person, and you have all 4 of these things that are part of you. And so if you neglect any of them, then that's to your detriment. And it's important that you take care of all of them. And so it's important that you know what those are for you. And so the physical, we usually don't have too much trouble talking about. The emotional, we don't have too much trouble talking about. So the physical, the mental, even the emotional, we can do. We get to the spiritual, and then, you know, people are afraid of, they don't want something forced upon them. And that's the beauty, at least from my perspective, is there is nothing to force. Just that you recognize, and some people say, well, I'm not religious. Well, okay, that's fine. But you still have a spiritual component. I'm not going to tell you what that is. You're going to tell me. And if you tell me you have absolutely none, that's where I'm going to question a little bit, because that's how we're built. And the literature, even from those who are, for lack of a better term, are very secular, speaks to that spiritual component. I mean, we've had the explosion of mindfulness within therapy, and things of this sort. So we understand that. I would just remind you, you can go to the Yale Center for Faith and Culture, the Life Worth Living Initiative, and talks about building a life worth living, and deals with that idea of spirituality way beyond just typical religion, and things of that sort. Angela Gorel out of Baylor University is good with that. And I'd already mentioned Lisa Miller, and things of that sort. So that's my big one, is just starting with that diagram and then saying, tell me, how do you deal with all of these areas in your life? And then we can break them down into components, right? So when we talk about the physical, or we could make it part of the emotional, or most any of them, but that's where we are able to talk about how does your sexuality express itself? Right? How is that going on? Is it a relationship only with yourself? Is it a relationship with others? As MFTs, my view is that everything we do is about relation, even if what we're dealing with is the relationship with ourselves at that point.
Perfect. Okay, I'm going to cut in here very quick. I'm going to pass the baton over to Rochelle, so because she has some questions for us. But Charity and Horatius, continue. For sure, give your tips and tricks as well. I just want to be mindful of time as well. So, Rochelle.
Awesome. Thanks, Astrid. Just a quick favor of the panelists, if you drop your resources into the chat so we can have a record of them, like the Yale Center for Living and Culture that you mentioned, Jim, that would be super helpful for us. Thanks so much for that. There's a few questions in here, and I would like to ask Kevin if you're willing to unmute your mic and ask your question to the panel.
I was asking about what we should do to deal with body image issues in therapy.
Anyone can jump in here. But yeah, as body image issues come up, we know they're there for both men, women. How have you guys seen that work completed and addressed?
Well, I'll jump in real quick to follow Jocelyn's good example. So I am, to use an older term, I'm definitely a WASP, right? A white Anglo-Saxon Protestant male. All right, I'm 57 years old, so that puts me in a certain category, and that kind of thing. So with body image, again, it depends. What are the people coming with? What is their frame of reference, and what is authoritative in their lives, right? And so if there's no sacred text, or and I'll use the term sacred text, but if there's no philosophical system, so we have to figure out what's authoritative for them, and then help them deal with the cognitive dissonance within that authoritative system. So because I'm most familiar with it, I'll use more of a Christian biblical idea. When they come and talk about body issues, then I want to take them to the scripture that says that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And I want to take them to Genesis and talk about how when God made people, that made humans, that this was very good. And I want to go through and talk about those things, if that's the reference system that they use, because they might not have been familiar with it. But it would be true for any other reference system. It would be going back to that reference system and finding those ideas and being able to address body image in that particular, and that would just be one small part, but I'd like the other panelists to jump in.
Yeah, I think with my my background in yoga, I definitely do a lot of mindfulness with my clients, sometimes even actual yoga postures and that kind of a thing. But turning inward, closing their eyes, making sure they're connecting with different physical parts of their body. I will do some exercises with clients or kind of send them home to do exercises, such as even just looking at themselves in the mirror and saying, I do this exercise with clients where I encourage them to do this naked, but if that feels very unapproachable, then that's okay. They can wear, some light clothing, but to look at themselves in the mirror and make just neutral comments about their body. So my legs are long, or I have brown hair, my eyes are hazel, instead of, oh, my eyes are this way, and making a judgment about it. Oh, my nose is so pointy, or my hips are really large. It's so easy for those judgments to show up. And so if we start gently by trying to just make neutral, just comments that have no form of judgment connected to them, like this is just a fact, starting there. And then you can build into spaces where you can go, okay, my legs are pretty wide around, my hips are large, but that allows me to dance in a certain way, allows me to walk or run or do certain things that I'm really grateful for. My nose, if I don't like how it looks, it allows me to smell things and really connect with my senses. So I can really be grateful for that. So starting in a space that is very kind of fact-based, and then leaning into why that can be a really beautiful thing instead of connecting more so with the judgments about those parts of the body.
Thank you, Jen and Jocelyn. I think, gosh, those are two really good points to go back to those sources and then to break it down into easier pieces, right? Go back to the simple, stick with the facts, and then build from there. We have several other questions, but we're getting real short on time. So I'm going to ask one last question, and that is just, what might we as therapists see if we fail to look for sexuality and spirituality in session and our client hasn't brought it up? What might we see happening?
We might not be seeing the full picture. We will not be seeing the full picture. We will not be seeing our clients in their full truth and authentic selves. There's so much to be seen when we touched on this at the very beginning. There's so much to be seen. There's so much that is missed when we don't ask those questions. And so I think it's really important to be the person who feels comfortable in it, to invite someone into that conversation with us. So again, making sure you're doing your own work to be that person that can feel really comfortable and grounded. Another thing I wanted to just mention really quickly from what Jen had said earlier, let's use our client's language as well, right? So I was using kind of, scientific terms, right? And you can start that way, but if someone calls a part of their body something else or calls sex something else, use that term because it makes it more comfortable for them as well. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I'm actually going to turn it over to Billy to close us out for the day, but great information today. Thank you everyone for being here, and thank you panelists. This has been a wonderful discussion.
Yes, thank you everyone. And I think Jocelyn, you said it earlier about just scratching the surface. I think on a topic like this, we are definitely just kind of starting to scratch the surface in discussions about sexuality and spirituality. So I appreciate you all coming and contributing. This was a really awesome dynamic discussion. And just a reminder to everyone, some like housekeeping bits. A CE is available if when you registered you chose if you wanted a CE or not. Those are free for members, so just keep an eye out for the eval, and $25 for people who are not WAMP members, but attendance to these events are free. but you should get an email probably in the next couple minutes with a link to the evaluation. We do need those completed even by the panelists by Sunday, so that early next week, our admin person can go and start sending out those CEs to you. So this has been recorded. So if you have any friends or colleagues who maybe missed it or are interested, or you want to go back and visit any of these topics within the next month, this should be up on the WAMPT website with the resources that some of the panelists had mentioned. I usually just include a list of those. If there are other questions around this topic that we didn't get a chance to get to and you really want answered, please don't hesitate to email wampt@wampt.org, and we can kind of ask our panelists if they wouldn't mind answering or following up on any of those questions if you need to. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure. I hope to see you all next month at our anniversary Standing at the Crossroads Building a Better Us event. I think it's going to be a really special event as well. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy your hot Fridays. All right. Bye.
Thank you, panelists.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Stay cool, stay hydrated, be safe.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. It was great to see everybody.
Okay. Nisa, are you still on here? Have any questions?
Do you want to stop the recording?